Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It is super early Thursday morning, so hopefully people had enough time to get their questions in, but let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Dr. Lilo wants to know how I prefer to play games that are 480i only via a scaler on a modern flat panel. The most common scenario you'd run into this would be the PlayStation 2 because it has by far the largest 480i only library. And Dr. Lilo's kind of torn between using motion adaptive deinterlacing, which sometimes you do really see the interlacing effects on a flat panel, even with the best scaler, or CRT Simulate, which seems promising, but they're not sure whether they should be combining it with mask or scanline effects for a more complete look. So my personal preference is CRT Simulate with my favorite mask. CRT Simulate, you have to enable Bob deinterlacing, and this is something that I'm going to give like a basic overview. I showed this in detail in the upcoming video, which just got delayed for reasons that aren't really anybody's fault. But Bob deinterlacing works by taking each interlaced field in each frame and separating them to each frame. So instead of 30 interlaced fields or frames with 60 fields, it would be 60 frames per second. But the way CRTs work, each of these are combed together. That's why you see those combing effects. So when you see Bob deinterlacing, you're actually seeing it flicker and alternate between the even and odd scan lines. Now, if you just use Bob deinterlacing, that flicker sometimes drives people crazy, other times not so much. However, if you combine that with CRT Simulate and you add a mask, now you're actually emulating the way a CRT's interlacing works, kind of combined with your persistence of vision plus the mask to cut through all of those. And while you're not going to replicate the look of a beam of light drawing an image one line at a time on the back of etched glass, it's going to be as close as you could get. And it's absolutely how I watch 480i content for movies, TV, whatever else, and 480i games as well, because I think it really does kind of emulate what you're supposed to be seeing on a CRT. And if you go back and you actually look at this stuff on a CRT, you could see the flicker, you could see all of this stuff. We just didn't really notice back in the day because there was no choice. TV was just 480i. So it's not like you really had something to compare it to that's in most people, I guess, that would be in your home that you could just see side by side. Whereas now we could all see that with, flat panels and progressive content versus CRTs if you wanted to. But that is generally my go-to. There's always some exceptions, and motion adaptive deinterlacing, especially on the RetroTink 4K, is excellent, but it's never going to be perfect because you're never going to perfectly deinterlace a 480i video game. Maybe if it's exactly 30 frames per second, maybe if you have 24p videos. I don't want to get, too far in the weeds here, but generally speaking, for 480i video games, to process in real time, I think personally, just a preference, you could totally disagree if you want, emulating the way it should have been seen on a CRT is the way to go. And I do think it hides the flicker, definitely with the CRT Simulate and the mask, but it also kind of hides some of the ugly effects that you see as a result of interlaced video. And you could do this on the Tink 5X or 4K. That's not a 4K only feature. And that's definitely what I would go to in most cases. Now, Dr. Lilo brings up a couple of other scenarios in which I think are very worth talking about. First, what about pre-scaling to 240p, disregarding half the vertical resolution for a forced progressive scan effect? This could be the best option depending on the game that you're playing. And that's something that you should really mess around with. And I think My Life in Gaming would probably be the perfect team of people to go through this and show you which type of game would benefit and why. But that's definitely something that might work. And it's kind of the same thing as when I used to take some GameCube and Dreamcast games that were either 480i or 480p and downscale them from 480p to 240p. Yeah, you're losing resolution, but sometimes that's the much better look that you're going for. So that would certainly be something that you could do. And with the Tink 4K, it's actually a fairly easy thing to do. Also, when playing PlayStation 2, do I generally try to use GSM to force 480p or even higher? Or do I prefer to leave that off, given its spotty game-by-game compatibility problems? I'll spend like 2 or 3 minutes messing with it. And if I can't get it to work basically right away, I give up because I have had such bad luck forcing games into progressive mode over the years. Now, I wholeheartedly admit I'm coming into this as like a grumpy old man gamer type of thing because of my past experiences. But I'd be willing to bet if I got the latest version of GSM and everything and really took the time to mess with settings, it might actually be much easier than it used to be. I don't know. I haven't really sat down and put hours into it in a while, but it could just be that you update GSM and then you try to download settings for each game or something like that. And lastly, do I know if there are any trade-offs with GSM forced progressive scan, like reduced color depth? I also think that's a per game basis. So I would love if anybody in the comments had time to share their thoughts on that. Do you lose frame rate like you do certainly with some games going to higher resolutions? Do you lose any kind of color depth? Do you lose clarity? Sometimes it's things like the menus look weird, but the gameplay itself is fine. I would have no problem with that personally, but I would love to know if there are anything else that I'm not really remembering at the moment. So this is a great discussion. 480i has been something that I have spent an unhealthy amount of time just really digging into in the past year, trying to really discover any better ways to present that to you on flat panels. And it's just exactly as confusing as you would imagine. So hopefully this was kind of a sort of step in the right direction, but I can't wait to have that scaling 480i home movies video out soon. I'm just waiting on one more thing for that, or two more things. I still need old point and shoot cameras that shoot 480p video. I need like 3 or 4 different brands of those so I could compare, because some are really bad. I have one that was terrible, which I think is good. I want to show both examples, but I definitely remember there being some that were decent quality, and I can't find any. So I'm still on the hunt for those. Anybody in the New York area, let me know if you have one that I could use for a couple days and send back to you. But yeah, hopefully I'll have more info on 480i stuff soon, but those are kind of my overall suggestions. CRT simulate with your favorite CRT emulation mask, or mess with other settings depending on the type of game. Maybe try forcing 480p, or maybe try prescaling to 240. Next up, couple questions from Dustin Mattison. First, if I have a go-to football watch party at someone's house, what's some of my favorite game day foods I look forward to? Beer. Number one, beer. Personally, Dustin's always happy to see deviled eggs or some homemade dip to go with chips, plus homemade wings. Yeah, honestly, and this is going to sound dumb and cheesy, but I love hanging out with my friends. The older you get, the less you get to see them. And I obviously love football. So anytime I got my friends and a beer in my hand and football on TV, I'm happy. Even when the Giants are losing like they always seem to do. But anyway, next question, more of a sound question. They've recently gotten a new sound system for their comedy shows. It's semi-wireless in the idea of there's a powered speaker and a passive speaker that gets its power from a cable connection. The cable that came with it's kind of short, so they ordered a 2-pack of 100-foot cables. Is there a bridge connector to link both, or do you think it'd be unsafe to run 200 feet of cable on a setup like that? And by semi-wireless, they mean it links to their mics wirelessly. So I think if you're just talking about sound traveling over 200 feet of cable to get to a speaker, you could find couplers for that. And my suggestion would be try it. Try it at home. You could just leave the wire coiled up if you want. If you have the space to go all 200 feet, cool. And just see if you have interference. In fact, the best thing to do would probably be to sit it all next to each other with the wire all coiled up, plug it in with the wire that it came with, talk, have a couple friends over just to see clarity, and then unplug it, plug in the 200-foot wire, and then talk again, say the same stuff, and see if there's a difference. And if there's a noticeable difference, then you have to then troubleshoot what the issue is. Are the cables fully unshielded? Are the couplers bad? Are the couplers loose and you got to duct tape them together or something? All those tricks that live people get to deal with all the time. So I would definitely try that out. And the only other thing I would try is just mess with the mic. And because this is something that you're touching on two trigger points here. First of all, I did IT stuff my whole life, but one of the things I did was trying to wirelessly distribute video through hospitals 15 years ago, before wireless is as good as it was today. And I guaranteed the company that it would not work, and they did not listen to me. And guess what? It didn't work. It's too much weird interference edge cases. So we would put 1 or 2 in the hospital that, on like rolling carts, but anything that was connected to a fixed arm all got wired connections because of the unreliability of it. Same thing in the music world. Some of the bands I was in, I never used wireless, and a couple of the guitarists, bassists, whatever, they would get on stage at certain venues and sound check, nothing would happen. So they'd have to unplug the wireless and plug in a cable because there's so much interference. And it's just like I talk about with wireless controllers, with RF for your CRTs. If you're in the middle of nowhere, you're probably going to have a perfect wireless signal with outstanding, circumstances. Somebody's microwave's cracked and emitting 2.4 gig waves and messing with everything. Extreme circumstances aside, you'll be fine. But you're playing in New York City, you're probably going to have issues with wireless. Maybe it'll work, maybe the quality will dip, maybe you'll drop out every now and then, but it won't really affect the show. That's not, I'm not telling you to only use wired. I just, from nerd to nerd, want to tell you what to expect if things go wrong, because that's our job as nerds. We got to plan for stuff that goes wrong too, not just plan for the happy. So I think to answer your question, I just think the 200-foot cable would probably work. You just got to check it, and just always in the back of your mind, like buy another cable, buy another like 200-foot XLR cable, just in case you got to plug your mic in one night, because you never know what's going to happen. And it's just one of those things where, like, for me personally, if I screwed up the show because, I just wasn't having a great day playing, I practiced a lot when I was playing live. So if I had a bad show, it could have just been, fate, right? But if I had a bad show because I cheaped out on equipment or forgot an extra cable or something that I totally could have prevented, I'd have been really pissed at myself. So I just wanted to add that nerd knowledge in there for you. Next up, Captain Retro has an NESRGB question. They've done a few front loaders already, but they just did their first twin Famicom using a multi-out for the AV. The video was perfect, but audio was wrong. It seems to be missing some FDS audio plus missing expansion audio on carts. They took the audio directly from the CPU to the NESRGB board per the installation instructions, and they've double-checked the multi-out wiring too. Luckily, they have a Tink 4K, so they've temporarily fixed the issue by using video from SCART and pulling audio directly from the twin Famicom RCA audio, but they would love to figure out how to pull the audio through the multi-out. They've also done the board mod suggested by Tim, the resistor changes. So I have never done a mod on a twin Famicom. The only one I had in my possession at one point was a friend of mine that wanted it the exact same installation done, and I was just afraid to work on something like that. A really awesome, rare piece of equipment, rare for US at least. I know it's plentiful in Japan. So I had Jose do it for me because I didn't trust myself. But the audio was perfect. So there's got to be a way to do it. There has to be a specific set of instructions. If the audio from the jacks, the actual audio jacks is working from the RCA audio, maybe pull that and run that to the multi-out connector, because remember, you could split audio like that using a Y circuit, a Y cable, and the worst thing that could happen is you get a little bit of interference. You're not going to blow anything out. It's not like splitting video signals. So can you try that? Would that just fix it? And anybody out there who's a NESRGB twin Famicom installation expert, can you chime in? Was my idea really stupid? Were there better ways to go about doing it? Is Captain Retro just missing one tiny little thing? Other than that, just check your installation points, which is something I would tell everybody, including myself. There's been many times where I've soldered to points that looked fine, but I desoldered them, cleaned them up a little bit, and trimmed the end of the cables, made it look as nice as possible, and suddenly everything just worked right again. So it could have been a cold solder joint, a cracked wire, could have been a lot of things. So yeah, just check all of that stuff, and hopefully other experts might be able to chime in. But at the very least, if it's working from the RCA audio, you should just be able to run that wire internally and jump it to the multi-out board. Next up, ACNOT54 has a Nintendo multi-out SCART cable from a reputable manufacturer that's starting to give them issues. They switched the cable between two different consoles, and lately they've noticed video signal drops randomly at times when they wiggle the connector at the multi-out side. How should they check the pinouts, and what should they look for when diagnosing this problem, or is it time for more cables? Well, first, I would pop open the SCART end, and I realize that you just told me the problem is probably on the multi-out side of things, but I'm only starting with that because it's easy. you unscrew the back, you pop it open, and just visually look for anything. I've absolutely seen scenarios before when you grab one end of the cable, it's actually wiggling the other end too, and you don't really realize it. So just check, because it's easy. Anybody with tweezers and a soldering gun should be able to fix any kind of weird or bridge connection or something like that. And just, yeah, if you have a magnifying glass or whatever else, or take pictures with your cell phone and zoom in and just really look at all of the connections and see if anything stands out to you. If not, then the problem might really be in the multi-out end. You could kind of look at the bottom of the connector and just see if you see any bent pins or anything like that. But the problem is that it's almost impossible to get the multi-out sides off in most cases. They're either overmolded or there's something else wrong. So I would contact the manufacturer that you bought it from and see. And it might be one of those things where, you bought it 5 years ago, so it's far out of warranty, but they say, hey, if you pay for shipping, I'll fix it, or I'll give you a discount on a new one. You never know. So, I've had good luck with all the reputable manufacturers, and if it's a year old or less, then they should replace it. And if it's 5 or 6 years old, they don't have to. And I wouldn't think negatively if they said, sorry, it's out of warranty. But I would just give it, to answer your question, I would just give it a few more troubleshooting points and then reach out to the manufacturer and then buy a replacement. But I will say that I abuse all of my cables badly. Even when I think that, okay, I'm going to have a permanent setup that I'm not going to use, and I'll zip tie all the cables so they never move, I always end up cutting the zip ties, pulling them out, plugging them into something else. I've inserted my cables more times than your average person would in a lifetime, because I'm constantly changing setups, and I rarely have cables go bad. So if something like this and I know they do go bad, so it does happen. I'm just saying it's not super common. So hopefully the manufacturer that you got it from would help you out. Next up, a couple questions from Jason Guffey. First, what's the deal with SCART connector cables sticking out from the leads at 45 degrees? Is it a strain issue? My guess is, yeah, I don't know for sure, but just looking at it, it's a heavy cable, lots of connectors. Plugging it in that way would have the strain come off more evenly than if you just had it sticking straight out and it was kind of pulling down on the cable. But it could have been, it could be more of like a cable management thing. There could have been a lot of reasons. I'm just guessing. If I'm a complete moron on this one, please let me know and I'll correct myself. But that's just a guess. And next, when they stream anime, both old and newish, on Crunchyroll, they notice a lot of judder. Their Blu-rays don't seem to have this problem, so it must be a streaming issue, even though their connection is solid. Not necessarily, but continuing, is there a judder reduction ability in their TV perhaps, or possibly in the RT4K that might remedy this even a tiny bit? Yeah, so what could be happening is the content was originally one frame rate, and then it was re-encoded into another for either streaming or for regional purposes. But here's where stuff gets really, really weird. And I will probably never do a video on this because of how in-depth it is. But there could be something where the content originated as NTSCJ out of Japan and then was converted to PAL in order to be distributed, and then converted from PAL to NTSC again for streaming services. So it could have been 24, then 30, then now 5994 or something. So there is a possibility that it is just unfixable unless somebody gets the original source and then rescans it and has it presented in the correct original frame rate. So especially with stuff like anime, there could be no possible way to fix it. However, if it's just something like 24p already sent out with 3.2 pull down applied on the stream, you could try using the Tink 4K to do the inverse telecine, the IVTC function, and you could also try to I forgot what the setting was in the LG C3. Look up the ratings review. The Abby from Ratings always digs into that. I watch all those videos, and they should probably be on the website as well. But there should be a setting that you enable that could auto detect and reverse that. And if it is, let's just oversimplify. I know experts are going to roll their eyes at me, but let's just say if it was a one conversion type of scenario, 24 to 3.2 pull down of 5994 or 30 to something else, this should be able to fix that. But if it's a multiple conversion scenario, nothing could fix it. So my apologies to the experts out there for oversimplifying, but this stuff is really complicated. So I think you should just give me a pass and let us normies in the video 24p telecine world try to get the easiest explanation. Next up, Rent Optional recently started transferring files back and forth to their MiSTer via the network rather than having to remove their micro SD card each time. And now they're able to start playing a game on their PlayStation 1 and drag and drop the save file right from the PS1's MemCard Pro network feature directly to their MiSTer and vice versa, which is pretty awesome because now you basically get to choose different ways of playing the same game, which is something that I've always done both for testing purposes and sometimes it's just easier. You have your rig all set up and ready to go, and other times you don't. So you got to move the save game file over. It's totally awesome. And I don't think it's Rent joked that this might seem unnecessary and stupid, but it's nerdy. No, I love it. It is nerdy, but I also think it's really cool and makes for a better workflow sometimes. However, the question is there an easy way to transfer saves with their Saturn via the mode or with their SNES FX Pack Pro wirelessly? And the answer is definitely no for the FX Pack Pro because SD cards with Wi-Fi chips don't work in that. It's just they draw too much power and they're not really made for something like this. And I think maybe some people have gotten it working, but it's not consistent. It's not something that you could just drop in and do. I remember years ago on the Crix forum, people were trying to get it working. And when I recently looked into it, it was still not something that was a solid, reliable solution. If I'm wrong and somebody discovered a way to do it, let me know. But I remember people going through a lot of trouble trying to figure that out. As for the Saturn and the mode, I don't think that's possible either. However, if somebody created either a save game cartridge or an ODE that has save game support with Wi-Fi built in, that would be possible. So I think my guess is with existing equipment, that's not really something that you could pull off, but it might be with any future products or any kind of add-ons or anything like that. So I do think stuff like this is pretty awesome. And I also think loading games over the network is a really big deal for people that have multiple ways to utilize something like that. So PS2, MiSTer, PS3, there's a lot of different ways to do that nowadays. So I think the more people that adopt that, the more people are going to realize how much easier that makes things, and save game files included, but also just keeping all of your ROMs and ISOs in one place. Also, another question, is it okay to power off your MiSTer via something like a USB-C cutoff switch that's powered by Alexa or remote control or anything like that? And generally, I would say yes. I mean, there might be some weird use case scenario in which that's not good, but the DE10 doesn't come with a power switch on it, and almost no case comes with a power switch on it, which is weird, by the way, but whatever. It's one of the many reasons why I love the Retro Castle cases, because Ivory has had a power switch on there for years. But essentially, that's what you're doing when you hit that hard power switch. You're just cutting the power. So I personally would not worry about that at all. The only weirdness might be is if you're using it through some kind of USB power adapter that's not the best quality, because then you might be doing things like sending weird voltage down it or something. But generally speaking, I would not worry about that at all, and I think it's a pretty good idea. And depending on your setup, it might just make things easier. Well, that's it for this week. As usual, if you have any questions at all, just please ask wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post, because it's kind of hard to figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through and answering your questions in real time as if we were hanging out somewhere together. Anybody that supports on any service is eligible. Just more people support on Patreon than other services, which is why very often, like today, you'll see only Patreon come up. But anybody who supports anywhere, thank you so much, and feel free to ask whatever you got. So, well, I'll see you all next week. Thanks again as usual, and have a great week.